Lyra didn't know that the man watching her from the shadows of the fighting pits was the Alpha King. She didn't know he'd been searching for his mate for 10 years, and she certainly didn't know that her desperate plan for freedom would seal her fate to him forever. The blade whistled past her ear, close enough that she felt the heat of its passage. Lyra spun, her own sword singing through the air to meet her opponent's next strike. The clash of metal rang through the underground arena, echoing off stone walls slick with decades of blood and sweat. 3 years. 3 years she'd been fighting in these pits for Lord Vance's entertainment, for his profit, for his twisted pleasure in watching her survive what should have killed her. Every night she dreamed of escape. Every morning she woke to the same iron shackles, the same stone cell, the same hopeless reality. Tonight felt different. The crowd above roared as she ducked beneath a vicious swing that would have taken her head clean off. Her opponent was massive, a mountain of muscle and scars who'd earned his reputation by never showing mercy. But Lyra had learned something in these 3 years of fighting for her life. Desperation made you faster than fear ever could. She feinted left, rolled right, and came up behind him with her blade pressed against his throat. "Yield," she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. He dropped his weapon. The crowd erupted, but Lyra barely heard them. Something was wrong, different. There was a presence in the arena tonight that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up, made something deep in her chest tighten like a golden thread being pulled taut. She scanned the crowd of nobles and merchants who came to watch the gladiator matches, searching for the source of the strange sensation. Her eyes swept over painted faces and glittering jewels until they found him. He stood in the shadows of the private boxes, perfectly still among the cheering masses. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that caught the torchlight, and eyes that seemed to glow gold in the flickering flames. Even at a distance, she could see the expensive cut of his clothes, the way other nobles gave him space without seeming to realize they were doing it. But it was the way he was looking at her that made her breath catch. Not with the cruel hunger of the other spectators, not with the calculating interest of someone placing bets on her life. He was looking at her like he'd been searching for something precious for a very long time and had finally found it. Their eyes met across the arena, and the world seemed to stop. Heat shot up her arm, spreading through her chest, settling somewhere behind her sternum like a second heartbeat. The sensation was so sudden, so overwhelming, that she actually took a step backward. Impossible. She turned away, forcing herself to focus on the roar of the crowd, the ache in her muscles. Anything but the golden-eyed stranger who made her feel things she had no name for. She raised her sword in acknowledgement of her victory and strode toward the exit, her opponent's life spared by her mercy. But she could still feel those eyes on her back as she disappeared into the shadows. An hour later, Lyra sat in her cell, cleaning the small cuts on her arms with water from a cracked bowl. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the familiar exhaustion and the ever-present ache of knowing that tomorrow would bring another fight, another dance with death, another day of survival instead of living. The sound of footsteps in the corridor made her look up. These weren't the heavy boots of the guards or the shuffling steps of servants bringing food. These were confident, measured steps that spoke of authority and purpose. Lord Vance appeared outside her cell, but he wasn't alone. The golden-eyed stranger from the arena stood beside him, and up close he was even more devastating. Sharp cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it knew how to be gentle and how to be cruel in equal measure, and those impossible eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "Lyra," Lord Vance said, his voice oozing the false kindness he used when he wanted something. "You fought beautifully tonight, truly magnificent." She said nothing. Experience had taught her that Vance's compliments always came with a price. "I have someone here who wishes to speak with you," Vance continued, gesturing to the stranger. "This is Kieran. He has a proposition." The man, Kieran, stepped forward, and Lyra found herself standing without meaning to. Something about his presence commanded attention, demanded acknowledgement. When he spoke, his voice was deep and warm, like whiskey and dark honey. "You're wasted here," he said simply, "fighting for scraps, for the entertainment of people who see you as nothing more than a spectacle." "I fight for my life," Lyra replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Same as always." "What if I told you there was another way?" Kieran's eyes never left hers, and she found she couldn't look away even if she'd wanted to. "What if I told you that you could fight for your freedom instead?" Something in her chest fluttered, dangerous and desperate. "I'd say that sounds too good to be true." Kieran smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face. "The Alpha King is required by ancient law to accept any challenge to single combat, no matter who issues it, win, and you earn whatever you've requested as the prize." Lyra felt the world tilt. "You're suggesting I challenge the Alpha King to a death match?" "I'm suggesting you challenge him for your freedom." The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and terror. Lord Vance shifted uncomfortably, clearly not liking where this conversation was heading, but the man called Kieran never took his eyes off her. "You could die," Vance said finally. "The Alpha King is the most powerful wolf shifter alive. No one has challenged him in decades." "She could win," Kieran said quietly. "I've watched her fight. She has something most opponents don't." "Which is?" "Everything to lose." Lyra's hands were shaking, but she clenched them into fists to hide it. This was insane, impossible. The Alpha King would tear her apart without breaking a sweat. But the alternative was spending the rest of her life in this cell, fighting until someone finally got lucky and killed her. "Why?" she asked, looking directly at Kieran. "Why would you help me?" For a moment something flickered in his golden eyes, something that looked almost like pain. "Because everyone deserves the chance to choose their own fate." The words hit her like a physical blow. Choice. When was the last time she'd had a real choice about anything? When was the last time she'd been able to decide her own path, instead of simply surviving whatever path others forced her onto? "If I accept," she said slowly, "and I challenge the Alpha King, what makes you think he won't just refuse?" "He can't," Kieran replied. "It's sacred law, written in blood and bound by magic older than the kingdom itself. He must accept any formal challenge issued according to the ancient rites." "And you know these rites?" "I do." Something in his voice made her study his face more carefully. There was knowledge there, authority, a confidence that spoke of familiarity with royal protocol. But there was also something else, something that made her pulse quicken and her skin feel too warm. "I need time to think about it," she said finally. "Of course, but Lyra—" Kieran moved closer to the bars of her cell, close enough that she could smell his scent, pine and rain and something wild that made her wolf instincts sing. "Don't think too long. Some opportunities don't come twice." He turned to leave, and panic flared in her chest. "Wait! If I do this, if I challenge the Alpha King and somehow win, what's to stop Lord Vance from simply claiming me again?" Kieran's smile was sharp as a blade. "Leave Lord Vance to me." Then he was gone, leaving behind only the scent of pine and the impossible promise of freedom. Lyra sank back onto her narrow cot, her mind spinning with possibilities and terror in equal measure. She could challenge the Alpha King. She could fight for her freedom instead of mere survival. She could choose. For the first time in 3 years, Lyra fell asleep with hope burning in her chest like a golden flame. She didn't know that her fate was already sealed, that the man who'd offered her freedom was the very king she'd be fighting. She didn't know that he'd felt the mate bond the moment their eyes met across the arena. She only knew that for the first time since her captivity began, she had something more dangerous than desperation driving her. She had hope. The training facility was nothing like the underground pits. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating polished wooden floors and walls lined with weapons that gleamed like silver flames. The air smelled of leather and steel instead of blood and desperation. Lyra stood in the centre of the spacious room, still wearing the simple tunic and leggings Kieran had provided. 3 days had passed since she'd accepted his impossible proposition, and every morning he arrived at dawn to train her for a fight that should have been her death sentence. "You're holding back," Kieran said, circling her with a practice sword in his hand. He moved like water, like shadow, with a predator's grace that made her pulse quicken for reasons that had nothing to do with combat. "I'm being smart," she replied, adjusting her grip on her own blade. "In the pits, you conserve energy. You don't waste it showing off." "This isn't the pits." His voice carried that same warm authority that had made her say yes 3 nights ago. "And the Alpha King isn't some desperate fighter looking for coin. He's the apex predator of our kind." Something in the way he said it made her look at him more carefully. Kieran spoke of the Alpha King with an intimacy that went beyond mere knowledge, beyond the kind of information any noble might possess. "You've met him," she said. It wasn't a question. Kieran's step faltered, just slightly, but she caught it. "I've been in his presence." "What's he like?" For a moment something flickered across Kieran's face that looked almost like pain. Dangerous, patient, stronger than you can imagine. He raised his sword. "Show me your defensive sequence again." They moved together across the polished floor, steel singing against steel, in a rhythm that felt strangely familiar. Every time their blades crossed, every time he stepped close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from his body, that golden thread in her chest pulled tighter. It was impossible to ignore how perfectly they moved together. When he feinted left, she was already spinning right. When she dropped low for a leg sweep, he was already jumping, as if he'd known what she would do before she knew it herself. "How are you doing that?" she panted during a brief break, sweat gleaming on her skin. "Doing what?" "Reading my moves, anticipating them. In the pits, it takes weeks of fighting the same opponent before you start to predict their patterns, but you—" She shook her head. "It's like you know what I'm going to do before I do it." Kieran went very still. When he looked at her, his golden eyes held an intensity that made her breath catch. "Perhaps we're well matched." "No." Lyra stepped closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. "It's more than that. It's like—" "Like what?" "Like we've done this before, like my body knows yours." The words left her mouth before she could stop them, and heat flooded her cheeks. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Kieran's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, and for a wild moment she thought he might step closer, might close the distance that suddenly felt like both everything and nothing. Instead, he stepped back. "Tell me about yourself," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Before the pits." The change of subject felt like cold water, but maybe that was safer. "Not much to tell. My father was a blacksmith, good man, but terrible with money. When he died, his debts fell to me and my sister." She picked up a cloth to wipe the sweat from her face. "Lord Vance offered to pay them in exchange for 7 years of service. I thought he meant kitchen work, maybe cleaning." "You thought wrong." "I thought wrong." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. "By the time I realized what kind of service he wanted, my sister was already safe in another province. I couldn't back out." "Where is she now?" "I don't know." The admission hurt more than any blade ever had. "Vance told me she was safe, but he could have been lying. He could have sold her to someone worse, or—" She couldn't finish the thought. Kieran's jaw tightened. "After you win your freedom, we'll find her." "We?" He looked surprised by his own words. "I meant, I could help you search for her, if you'd like." There was something careful about the way he said it, something that made her study his face. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "I know enough." "You know I'm a good fighter. That doesn't make me a good person." "Doesn't it?" Kieran set down his practice sword and moved closer, close enough that she could see flecks of amber in his golden eyes. "You spared your opponent's life 3 nights ago, In a place where mercy is seen as weakness, you chose compassion. He yielded. The fight was over. Most gladiators would have killed him anyway. The crowd wanted blood. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. But you're not most gladiators. Are you? The intensity in his gaze made something flutter in her stomach. You don't know what you're talking about. I know that you protected your sister by sacrificing yourself. I know that you've survived 3 years in hell without letting it break your spirit. I know that you fight like someone who still believes in honor, even in a place where honor gets you killed. His words hit her like physical blows, each one finding a wound she didn't know she carried. Stop. I know that you're brave and kind and stronger than you have any right to be after everything you've endured. Stop. Her voice cracked on the word, but Kieran stepped closer instead, close enough that she could feel his warmth, close enough that the golden thread in her chest was practically singing. And I know that 3 years ago, someone made the biggest mistake of their life when they underestimated you. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. You're wrong about me. Am I? I'm not brave. I'm terrified. Every night, every fight, I'm so scared I can barely breathe. I'm not strong. I'm just stubborn. And I'm not kind. I'm angry. So angry that sometimes I'm afraid of what I might do if I ever get the chance. Good, Kieran said softly. Angry is good. Angry will keep you alive when you face the Alpha King. The slip didn't go unnoticed, but before Lyra could question it, the door to the training facility burst open. A man strode in, tall and lean with silver hair and eyes that held the unmistakable authority of someone used to being obeyed instantly. Your Majesty, the man said, his voice tight with urgency. The Council is demanding answers about the Challenger. They want to know why you're... He stopped mid-sentence when he noticed Lyra standing there, her practice sword still in her hand, sweat cooling on her skin. The world tilted. Your Majesty. Lyra looked from the newcomer to Kieran, pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. The way other nobles had given him space in the arena. The intimate knowledge of royal protocol. The authority that seemed to radiate from him like heat. You're him, she whispered, the words barely audible. You're the Alpha King. Kieran's face went carefully blank. Lyra, you're the man I'm supposed to fight. Her voice was getting louder, sharper, edged with betrayal and fury. You've been training me to fight yourself. I can explain. Explain what? That this has all been some kind of game to you? Some elaborate joke? The practice sword clattered to the floor as she backed away from him. Was any of it real? The offer of freedom? The training? Or were you just amusing yourself with the gladiator who was stupid enough to think she could challenge a king? It's all real. Kieran's voice was rough, with something that might have been desperation. The challenge? Your freedom? All of it? How can I believe anything you say? Tears were streaming down her face now, hot and angry. You lied to me. You let me trust you, let me think you were trying to help me. And all this time you were planning to... To what? Let me embarrass myself in the arena before you killed me? I would never hurt you. You already have. The words hit him like a physical blow. She saw him flinch, saw something crack behind those golden eyes that had watched her with such careful intensity. Lyra, please let me explain. But she was already backing toward the door, shaking her head. I need to think. I need to... Don't run. The command in his voice made her stop despite herself. Please, don't run from me. Why not? You've been running from the truth since the moment we met. I wanted you to see me as just a man first, he said quietly, before you knew what I was, before the crown and the power and all the things that make people afraid got in the way. Well, congratulations. Mission accomplished. She reached for the door handle. I saw you as just a man, and now I know that man doesn't exist. He does. Kieran's voice broke on the words. He does exist. He's standing right here, terrified that he's lost the most important thing he's ever found before he even had a chance to fight for it. Lyra's hand stilled on the door handle. Something in his voice, in the raw honesty of it, made her turn back to look at him. He stood in the middle of the training floor like a man facing his own execution, golden eyes blazing with an emotion she couldn't name. "The mate bond," she whispered, understanding flooding through her. "You feel it too." "From the moment I saw you in that arena," he confirmed, "fighting like the warrior you were born to be. Beautiful and fierce and absolutely magnificent." The golden thread in her chest pulled so tight it was hard to breathe. "This is impossible." "Yes. I'm nobody, a slave, a fighter. How can I be mated to a king?" "You're everything," Kieran said simply, "and I'm just a man who's been searching for his mate for 10 years, hoping against hope that when I found her, she might choose to stay." The silence stretched between them, filled with possibility and terror, and the weight of a bond neither of them had chosen, but both of them felt. Finally, Lyra spoke. "The challenge stands? If you want it to. And if I win, then you're free, free to go wherever you want, be whatever you want." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Free to leave me behind if that's what you choose." She studied his face, looking for any sign of deception, any hint that this was still part of some elaborate game. But all she saw was truth, raw and painful and absolutely sincere. "And if I lose?" Something fierce flashed in his golden eyes. "You won't lose. I won't let you." The promise hit her like a physical force, and suddenly she understood. This wasn't about proving her strength or earning her freedom through combat. This was about giving her the choice to claim both. "I'll fight you," she said finally, "but I want you to promise me something. Anything. Fight me for real. Don't hold back. Don't let me win because you feel sorry for me or because of some bond I never asked for. If I'm going to be free, I'm going to earn it." Kieran's smile was sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. "As you wish, my queen." The title sent heat spiralling through her, but she pushed it aside. Queen was something she'd have to earn too. 3 more days, she said. "Then we settle this." 3 more days, he agreed. As Lyra walked out of the training facility, she could feel his eyes on her back, could feel the golden thread stretching but not breaking between them. She had 3 days to prepare for a fight that would determine her entire future. She had 3 days to decide if she wanted to be free of him or free with him. The thought terrified her more than any blade ever had. The gardens of the royal estate were nothing like the cramped stone cells of Lord Vance's compound. Ancient oak trees stretched toward a sky painted with the soft colours of dawn, and the air carried the scent of jasmine and morning dew instead of blood and despair. Lyra walked the winding paths in the early hours when the world was quiet and she could pretend for just a moment that she belonged in such beauty. 2 days had passed since the revelation in the training facility. 2 days of avoiding Kieran's searching looks, of training alone in the smaller practice room, of trying to convince herself that the mate bond was just another form of imprisonment she needed to escape. It wasn't working. Every breath she took seemed to carry his scent, pine and rain and something wild that made her wolf stir restlessly beneath her skin. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the way he'd looked when she accused him of lying, like she'd driven a blade straight through his heart. The golden thread that connected them pulled tighter with each passing hour, until she felt like she might snap from the tension. "You're up early." Lyra spun toward the voice, her heart leaping into her throat. Kieran stood in the shadow of an ancient willow, dressed simply in dark pants and a white shirt that emphasized the golden tan of his skin. He looked tired, she realized. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before, and his usually perfect composure seemed frayed around the edges. "I couldn't sleep," she said, proud that her voice remained steady. "Neither could I." He stepped out of the shadows, moving with that same predator's grace that made her pulse quicken despite everything. "The bond doesn't make rest easy when your mate is upset with you." "I'm not your mate." The words tasted like lies on her tongue. "Aren't you?" His golden eyes held hers with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. Your wolf knows what mine knows. I can see it in the way you look at me, feel it in the way your scent changes when I'm near. Heat flooded her cheeks. That doesn't mean anything. Doesn't it? She turned away from him, focusing on the distant mountains instead of the way his proximity made her skin feel too warm. Even if it did, it doesn't matter. You're a king. I'm a gladiator. The bond made a mistake. The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes. Then explain to me how this is supposed to work, she snapped, whirling back to face him. Am I supposed to curtsy and call you your majesty while we're mated? Am I supposed to pretend I know how to be a queen? I don't know the first thing about royal protocol or politics or any of the things your mate would need to know. You think I care about protocol? You should. Your kingdom should. The words tumbled out of her. 3 years of feeling worthless and small, finally finding their voice. I'm nobody, Kieran. I'm damaged goods. I've killed people for entertainment. I've done things to survive that would make your nobles faint with horror. How can you look at me and see a queen? Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Because I see you, he said quietly, taking a step closer. Not the gladiator Lord Vance tried to break. Not the girl who was sold to pay her father's debts. I see the woman who protected her sister at the cost of her own freedom. The fighter who shows mercy even when mercy might get her killed. The person who survived 3 years of hell without losing her honour or her compassion. You don't understand. I understand that you think you're not worthy of love. His voice was rough with emotion. I understand that someone taught you to believe you were worthless, and that belief is so deep it colours everything you see. He took another step closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. But you're wrong. Am I? The question came out as barely a whisper. You're the bravest person I've ever met. You're strong and fierce and beautiful, and you have no idea how magnificent you are. His hand rose as if to touch her face, then fell back to his side. I've been searching for my mate for 10 years, hoping that when I found her, she might choose to stay with me despite the crown and the responsibilities and all the ways being mated to a king would complicate her life. I never expected to find someone who would challenge me to be better than I am. Kieran, I know this is overwhelming. I know the timing is terrible and the circumstances are impossible, but the bond doesn't lie, Lyra. What you feel when you look at me, what I feel when I look at you, that's real. That's worth fighting for. The golden thread in her chest pulled so tight it was hard to breathe. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that the warmth in his eyes was genuine and not just some elaborate performance designed to manipulate her into compliance. But 3 years of brutal experience had taught her that hope was dangerous. I need time, she said finally, to think, to figure out what I want. Of course. The acceptance in his voice surprised her. Take all the time you need. What if I decide I want my freedom more than I want you? Pain flickered across his features, but his voice remained steady. Then I'll let you go. Just like that. Just like that. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I told you before, everyone deserves the chance to choose their own fate. That includes choosing not to be mated to me. The words hit her like a physical blow. Part of her had expected him to argue, to use his power or his position to try to convince her to stay. The fact that he wouldn't, that he would actually let her walk away from him despite the bond, made something crack open in her chest. I should go, she said, needing distance before she did something stupid like close the space between them and find out if his lips tasted as warm as they looked. Lyra. His voice stopped her as she turned to leave. When she looked back, his golden eyes held an intensity that made her knees weak. Whatever you decide about us, the challenge still stands. Win or lose, you'll have your freedom. I promise you that. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and fled deeper into the gardens. But she didn't get far. Lord Vance stood on the main path like a spider waiting in his web, flanked by 2 of his personal guards. He looked exactly the same as he had 3 years ago, expensively dressed, perfectly groomed, and utterly without conscience. The sight of him made every instinct she'd developed scream at her to run. "Hello, my dear," he said, his voice carrying that familiar oily charm. "You look well. Freedom suits you. What are you doing here?" Lyra's hand instinctively reached for the sword that wasn't there. She was dressed for a garden walk, not a fight. "I've come to collect what's mine." Vance's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "You seem to have forgotten that your debt hasn't been paid. 7 years of service, we agreed. You've only given me 3. The challenge? The challenge is a fantasy, child. A game you've been allowed to play because it amuses certain people." Vance took a step closer, and his guards moved with him. "But games end. Reality remains. You belong to me for 4 more years, and I've decided your talents would be better utilised elsewhere." Fear crawled up Lyra's spine, but she forced herself to stand straighter. "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Oh, but you are." Vance's smile widened. "You see, I received some very interesting information this morning about a young woman living in a cottage in the northern province. Pretty thing, works as a seamstress, goes by the name Elena." The world tilted. "No." "Your sister sends her regards. By the way, such a sweet girl, it would be a shame if something happened to her." Rage and terror warred in Lyra's chest, but terror won. Elena was everything good and pure left in her world, the only reason she'd survived the past 3 years. The thought of Vance's hands on her sister made bile rise in her throat. "What do you want?" "I want you to come home with me, now, quietly, without making a scene that might upset your royal friends." Vance's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. "Do that, and your sister remains safe and sound in her little cottage. Refuse, and well—" He shrugged. "Accidents happen, especially to young women living alone." Lyra's hands clenched into fists. "You bastard! Now, language, my dear. We wouldn't want the Alpha King to think his potential mate was raised without proper manners." The casual cruelty of it, the way he spoke about Elena like she was a game piece to be moved around a board, sent fury blazing through her veins. But beneath the rage was a cold, calculating part of her mind that had kept her alive in the fighting pits. Vance had guards. She was unarmed. And somewhere in the northern province, her sister was going about her day with no idea that her life hung in the balance. "I need to get my things," she said finally. "No need. Everything you require will be provided." Vance gestured to his guards. "Shall we?" "Actually," a new voice said from behind them, cold as winter wind and twice as dangerous, "I don't think we shall." Kieran stepped out of the shadows of the willow grove, and Lyra's breath caught. This wasn't the man who'd been gentle with her in the training facility, who'd offered patient understanding and careful distance. This was the Alpha King in all his terrible glory, power radiating from him like heat from a forge. His eyes had shifted from warm gold to molten amber, and when he smiled at Lord Vance, every instinct Lyra possessed screamed danger. "Your Majesty," Vance said, his voice suddenly much less confident, "I was just collecting my property." "Your property?" Kieran's voice was silk over steel. "How interesting. I was under the impression that chattel slavery had been outlawed in my kingdom for over 50 years. "A debt contract, Your Majesty. Perfectly legal." "Ah." Kieran nodded thoughtfully, then looked directly at Lyra. "And what does this contract say about threatening the debtor's family members?" Vance's face went pale. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "Let me be more specific." Kieran took a step forward, and his guards moved to flank him. Unlike Vance's hired muscle, these men looked like they could kill with their bare hands and sleep peacefully afterward. "What does your contract say about threatening to murder innocent young women in order to maintain compliance?" "Your Majesty, I assure you, because I'm fairly certain that crosses the line from debt collection into extortion, and extortion, Lord Vance, is a capital offence." The silence that followed was so complete that Lyra could hear her own heartbeat. Vance looked from Kieran to his guards to Lyra, clearly realising that the game had shifted in ways he hadn't anticipated. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding," Vance said carefully. "Indeed." Kieran's smile was all predator now. "Allow me to clear it up. Miss Lyra is under my protection. Anyone who threatens her or her family will answer to me personally. Is that clear enough?" "Perfectly clear, Your Majesty." "Excellent. Now, about that debt contract." Kieran pulled a folded paper from his jacket. "I believe this settles the matter." Vance took the paper with shaking hands and unfolded it. His face went from pale to ashen as he read. "What is it?" Lyra asked. "A bill of sale," Kieran said calmly. "I've purchased your debt from Lord Vance. Full payment, plus interest, plus compensation for the illegal use of violence in debt collection." Lyra's head spun. "You bought me?" "I freed you." His golden eyes met hers, warm again instead of cold. "The debt is satisfied. The contract is void. You owe no one anything." "That's—" She couldn't find the words. After 3 years of belonging to someone else, of being owned and used and treated like property, the concept of freedom felt too large to grasp. "That's illegal," Vance sputtered. "She challenged the Alpha King. The ancient laws—" "The ancient laws," Kieran interrupted, "state that any formal challenge must be honoured. They say nothing about the challenger's legal status prior to the match." His smile turned predatory again. "Miss Lyra is now a free citizen of this kingdom. If she chooses to challenge me for additional recompense, that's her right." Vance crumpled the bill of sale in his fist. "This isn't over." "Oh, but it is." Kieran's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, but it carried enough menace to make Vance's guards take a step backward. "And Vance, if I hear that any harm has come to Eleanor of the Northern Province, or if you so much as send a letter in her direction, I will hunt you down myself. Are we clear?" "Crystal," Vance managed. "Good. Now get off my land." Vance and his guards fled like rabbits before wolves, leaving Lyra alone with the man who had just casually upended her entire world. Again. "You bought me," she said, still trying to process what had just happened. "I freed you," Kieran corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there? Now instead of owing Vance, I owe you." "You owe me nothing." He handed her another paper, the original debt contract, marked paid in full. "This is yours. Do whatever you want with it." Lyra stared at the document that had controlled her life for 3 years, then looked up at Kieran. "Why?" "Because you deserve to make your choices from a place of freedom, not fear." His golden eyes held hers with an intensity that made the mate bond sing. "Whether you choose to fight me or not, whether you choose to stay or go, it should be because it's what you want, not because you're afraid of what will happen to your sister if you refuse." Something cracked open in Lyra's chest, something that had been locked away for so long she'd forgotten it existed. Hope. Real hope. Not the desperate kind that came from having nothing left to lose. "The challenge still stands," she said quietly. "If you want it to." "I do." She looked down at the debt contract, then back up at him. "But not for my freedom. I already have that." "Then what for?" "For the right to choose you." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, raw and honest and terrifying. "I need to know that I'm strong enough to stand beside you, not just because of some bond the moon goddess chose for us, but because I chose it myself." Kieran's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "As you wish, my queen." This time the title didn't make her want to run. This time it sounded like a promise she might be brave enough to keep. 2 more days, she said. 2 more days, he agreed. As they walked back toward the palace together, the golden thread between them hummed with possibility instead of tension. Lyra didn't know if she was strong enough to defeat the Alpha King in single combat, but for the first time in 3 years, she knew she was free enough to find out. And maybe, just maybe, that was the same thing. The great hall of the royal palace had never been so silent. 500 nobles, council members, and distinguished guests sat in stunned quiet as the Alpha King's words echoed off the ancient stone walls. The massive chandeliers cast dancing shadows across faces frozen in shock, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. "I will accept the formal challenge," Kieran announced from his throne, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "In 3 days' time, at sunset, I will face Lyra of House Thorn in single combat for her freedom and her right to stand as my equal." The silence shattered like glass. Voices erupted from every corner of the hall, outraged nobles demanding explanations, council members shouting about precedent and protocol, reporters scribbling frantically as they realized they were witnessing history in the making. Through it all, Lyra stood at the center of the chaos, her chin raised and her spine straight despite the hundreds of eyes fixed on her with everything from curiosity to contempt. She wore the formal dress Kieran had provided, deep blue silk that brought out the silver in her eyes and made her look every inch the lady she'd never been raised to be. But beneath the elegant exterior, her heart hammered against her ribs as she faced the reality of what they'd just set in motion. "This is madness!" Lord Chancellor Blackwood's voice cut through the din as he rose from his seat near the throne. He was an older man, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of authority that came from decades of service to the crown. "Your Majesty, no one has challenged the Alpha King in over 50 years. The ancient laws—" "The ancient laws are clear," Kieran interrupted, his golden eyes never leaving Lyra's face. "Any citizen of this kingdom may issue a formal challenge for grievances against the crown. The challenge has been issued according to proper ritual. I am bound by law and honour to accept." "But she's a gladiator!" The shout came from somewhere in the crowd, followed by a chorus of agreement. "A former slave! She has no standing to make demands of the crown." "She is a free citizen of this kingdom," Kieran's voice dropped to something dangerous, "and my mate. Anyone who questions her standing questions me." The word mate hit the crowd like a physical blow. The outraged voices grew louder, more frantic, as the political implications began to sink in. If Lyra was truly his mate, if she won the challenge, she would have every right to claim her place as Lunar Queen. "Your Majesty," Chancellor Blackwood tried again, his voice carefully controlled, "perhaps we might discuss this matter privately." "There is nothing to discuss." Kieran rose from his throne, and the power that radiated from him was enough to quiet even the most vocal protests. "The challenge stands. In 3 days at sunset, I will meet Miss Thorne in the arena. The terms are simple. If she wins, she claims her freedom and her right to choose her own path. If I win—" His eyes found hers across the chaos of the hall. "I ask only for the chance to court her properly." Heat flooded Lyra's cheeks, but she held his gaze steady. Around them, the crowd erupted again, but she heard none of it. There was only Kieran, looking at her like she was the most precious thing in his kingdom, like she was worth fighting an entire room of outraged nobles for. "The lady will be housed in the royal guest wing until the challenge," Kieran continued, his voice carrying easily over the noise. "She will be treated with the respect due to any citizen under my protection. Anyone who fails to show her proper courtesy will answer to me personally." The threat in his tone was unmistakable, and gradually the crowd began to settle into an uneasy quiet. But Lyra could feel the weight of their stares, could practically hear the whispered conversations that would follow her for the next 3 days. "Your Majesty," a new voice called from the back of the hall. Lyra turned to see a woman rising from her seat. Tall, elegant, with the kind of classical beauty that graced royal portraits. "Surely you cannot be serious about this spectacle, the dignity of the crown." "Lady Evangeline," Kieran's voice held a warning, "I would choose your next words very carefully." But Lady Evangeline was either braver or more foolish than most. The people will never accept a gladiator as their queen. She's not one of us, your majesty. She doesn't understand our ways, our traditions. How can she possibly rule? She won't rule, another voice chimed in. She'll die in the arena like she should have years ago. The cruel laughter that followed made something dark and fierce rise in Lyra's chest. She'd faced this kind of mockery in the fighting pits, where nobles came to watch her bleed for their entertainment. But this was different. This wasn't just about her. It was about Kieran, about his judgment, about the entire kingdom. "You're right," Lyra said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, despite its quiet tone. "I'm not one of you." The crowd quieted, surprised to hear her speak at all. "I wasn't born in a palace or raised with silk gowns and etiquette lessons. I don't know which fork to use at formal dinners or how to curtsy without falling over." She took a step forward, her chin raised higher. "I've killed men with my bare hands. I've slept on stone floors and eaten scraps. I've bled for your entertainment and survived things that would break most of you." The hall was utterly silent now, every eye fixed on her with a mixture of fascination and horror. "But I also know what it's like to fight for something bigger than myself. I know how to protect people who can't protect themselves. I know the value of mercy and the weight of justice." She looked directly at Lady Evangeline. "And I know that strength isn't about being born into the right family or wearing the right clothes. It's about making the hard choices when everything you care about is on the line." "Pretty words," Lady Evangeline said with a sneer. "But words won't help you when you're facing the Alpha King's claws." "No," Lyra agreed, "they won't. But neither will your noble bloodline if you ever find yourself in a real fight." The crowd stirred uneasily, some nobles looking offended, while others seemed almost impressed by her boldness. But Lyra wasn't done. "In 3 days, I'll prove that I'm strong enough to stand beside your king. Not because I was born to it, but because I chose it. Because he's worth fighting for, and so is this kingdom." She let her gaze sweep across the crowd. "And if that's not good enough for you, then perhaps you should ask yourself what you've done lately to earn your place at his side." The silence that followed was so complete that Lyra could hear her own heartbeat. She'd either just won their grudging respect or signed her own death warrant, and she honestly wasn't sure which. Then Kieran began to clap. The sound of his applause echoed through the hall, slow and deliberate and utterly confident. One by one, others joined him. First his personal guards, then a few younger nobles, then more and more, until nearly half the hall was applauding her bold declaration. "Well said, my lady," Kieran said when the applause finally died down. His golden eyes blazed with something that looked dangerously like pride. "I believe that concludes today's proceedings." As the crowd began to disperse, murmuring among themselves about what they'd witnessed, Kieran stepped down from his throne and moved toward Lyra. The nobles gave him a wide berth, their conversations dying to whispers as he passed. "That was either very brave or very stupid," he said quietly when he reached her side. "Probably both." Lyra's hands were shaking, but she clasped them behind her back to hide it. "Did I just make this worse for you?" "You just showed them exactly why you're worthy to be their queen." His voice was warm with admiration. "Though I suspect the next 3 days are going to be challenging in ways that have nothing to do with our fight." As if summoned by his words, Chancellor Blackwood approached with the expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else in the kingdom. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "the Royal Council requests an emergency session. There are concerns about the political ramifications of this challenge." "I'm sure there are." Kieran's tone was dry. "Tell them I'll meet with them this evening. Right now I need to ensure that our guest is properly settled." "Of course, Your Majesty, but perhaps you should know—" Blackwood glanced nervously at Lyra. "There have already been inquiries from the neighbouring kingdoms. News of the challenge is spreading rapidly." "Let it spread." Kieran's hand found the small of Lyra's back, a possessive gesture that sent heat spiralling up her spine. The whole world can watch if they choose. The result will be the same. Blackwood looked like he wanted to argue, but one look at Kieran's face apparently convinced him otherwise. "As you wish, Your Majesty." As they walked through the palace corridors toward the guest wing, Lyra was acutely aware of the servants and guards they passed. Some watched her with curiosity, others with barely concealed disdain. A few offered small nods of respect that surprised her. "Having second thoughts?" Kieran asked quietly. "About the challenge? No." She glanced up at him, taking in the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair caught the light from the sconces along the walls. "About whether I'm strong enough to win? Every single second." "You are." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've seen you fight, not just with swords, but with words, with courage, with heart." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his golden eyes serious. "You stood in front of 500 nobles who think you're beneath them and made them listen, made them think. Some of them will leave here tonight reconsidering what it means to be worthy of power. And the others will leave here planning ways to make sure I never see another sunrise. Probably." His smile was sharp as a blade, "but that's what the guards are for." They reached the guest wing, where Kieran showed her to a suite of rooms that were larger and more luxurious than any place she'd ever slept. Silk hangings adorned the windows, and a fire crackled merrily in an ornate fireplace. It was beautiful, but it felt like a cage made of gold instead of iron. "Will you be all right here?" Kieran asked, seeming to sense her discomfort. "It's perfect," she managed a smile, "though I might miss my stone cell if this bed is too soft to sleep in." "If you can't sleep, you know where to find me." The words were casual, but there was something in his voice that made her pulse quicken. "Kieran." She reached out before she could stop herself, her fingers brushing against his hand. The contact sent electricity up her arm, and she saw his eyes flare in response. "Thank you, for today, for defending me." "You didn't need defending." His fingers intertwined with hers, warm and strong and absolutely right. "But you'll always have it anyway." The mate bond hummed between them, golden and bright and impossible to ignore. For a moment, Lyra let herself imagine what it would be like to close the distance between them, to find out if his lips were as warm as the rest of him, to lose herself in the safety of his arms. Then reality crashed back. In 3 days they would face each other with real weapons and real intent. One of them might not walk away. "I should rest," she said, pulling her hand free despite every instinct that screamed at her to hold on. Of course. If Kieran was disappointed by her withdrawal, he didn't show it. "Sleep well, my lady. Dream of victory." After he left, Lyra stood at the window of her beautiful prison, looking out at the city below. Lights twinkled in windows like fallen stars, and she could see people moving through the streets, going about their lives with no idea that their king's fate and their kingdom's future would be decided in 3 days' time. Somewhere out there, reporters were already spreading word of the challenge to neighbouring kingdoms. Nobles were gathering in private chambers to discuss what this meant for their political alliances. Common people were placing bets on whether their king would kill the gladiator or claim her. And in a cottage in the northern province, her sister Elena was probably settling down to sleep, safe and free and unaware that everything had changed. Lyra pressed her palm against the cool glass and made a silent promise. In 3 days she would prove that love was stronger than bloodline. That choice was more powerful than birthright, and that a gladiator could stand beside a king as his equal. She would win this fight. She had to. Because the alternative, losing Kieran, losing the impossible future that had begun to take shape in her heart, was unthinkable. 3 more days. Then she would discover if she was strong enough to claim the crown she'd never dreamed of wanting, or if she would die trying. Either way, she would face her fate with her head held high and her heart full of the kind of hope she thought was lost forever. The golden thread that connected her to Kieran pulled taut across the distance between them, and for the first time since this all began, it felt less like a chain and more like a lifeline. Soon she would know which one it truly was. The ancient Colosseum had never held so many people. 20,000 spectators filled every seat, every standing space, every available inch of stone and mortar that could support human weight. The roar of their voices was like thunder, echoing off the massive walls and rolling across the arena floor where sand had been spread to soak up whatever blood would be spilled. Lyra stood in the preparation chamber beneath the arena, listening to the crowd above and trying to calm the wild beating of her heart. She wore simple fighting leathers, black pants, a fitted tunic, and boots that would give her the speed and mobility she'd need. Her hair was braided back in the warrior's knot she'd learned in the gladiator pits, and her sword hung at her side like an old friend. 3 days of preparation had led to this moment. 3 days of training, of political manoeuvring, of trying to ignore the growing certainty that she was about to die in front of the largest audience in the kingdom's history. "The crowd is restless," Marcus Kieran's beta said from the doorway. He'd been assigned as her escort, though Lyra suspected he was really there to make sure she didn't bolt. "Half of them are betting on the king to end it quickly. The other half are hoping you'll put up enough of a fight to make it entertaining." "Comforting," Lyra murmured, checking the balance of her blade one more time. "For what it's worth," Marcus continued, "I think you have a chance. Not to win, maybe, but to survive. The king isn't a cruel man. If you yield early—" "I won't yield." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "I didn't come this far to give up when things get difficult." Marcus nodded slowly. "He said you'd say that. Said you were too stubborn to know when to quit." "He knows me well. Better than you know yourself, I think." Marcus's expression softened slightly. "He's been pacing his chambers like a caged wolf for the past hour. I've never seen him so agitated before a fight." Something twisted in Lyra's chest. "He's fought challengers before?" "Not like this, not when it mattered." Marcus met her eyes. "Win or lose, you've already changed everything. The kingdom will never be the same after today." Before Lyra could ask what he meant, a horn sounded above them, the signal that the challenge was about to begin. The roar of the crowd intensified, and Lyra felt her pulse spike in response. "It's time," Marcus said. Lyra nodded and followed him through the stone corridors toward the arena entrance. With each step, the noise above grew louder, more frenzied. She could hear individual voices now, people calling for blood, for justice, for spectacle. Some were chanting her name, others were chanting Kieran's. They reached the massive iron gate that separated the preparation area from the arena floor. Through the bars, Lyra could see the vast expanse of sand stretching away toward the opposite side, where another gate would soon open to admit the Alpha King. "Remember," Marcus said quietly, "he's faster than anything you've ever fought. Stronger, too. His wolf gives him advantages you can't match with pure skill." "Then how do I win?" "You don't fight his strengths, you find his weaknesses." Marcus paused. "And you remember that he's not just the Alpha King in there, he's a man who's terrified of losing the most important thing he's ever found." Before Lyra could process that fully, the gate began to rise with a grinding of ancient metal. The sound of the crowd hit her like a physical force as she stepped out onto the arena floor, her boots sinking slightly into the soft sand. The Colosseum was even more overwhelming from inside. Faces stretched up into the shadows, a sea of humanity watching her every move with hungry eyes. Banners flew from the upper levels, some bearing the royal crest, others displaying the colours of noble houses that had come to witness history in the making. But Lyra saw none of it. Her attention was fixed on the figure emerging from the gate across the arena. Kieran walked toward the centre with the fluid grace of a born predator, wearing black leather similar to her own, but cut in a style that emphasised the breadth of his shoulders and the lethal power in his frame. His dark hair caught the light of the setting sun, and even at this distance she could see the golden glow of his eyes. They met in the centre of the arena, where an ancient circle of stones marked the traditional duelling ground. The crowd's roar faded to an expectant hush as they faced each other across the small space that separated them. "Last chance to reconsider," Kieran said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "You could yield now, with honour. No one would think less of you." "I would." Lyra drew her sword, the steel ringing as it cleared the scabbard. "I told you I wanted to earn this. That means fighting you for real." "As you wish." Kieran's own blade appeared in his hand with deadly grace. "But know that whatever happens here, you already have my heart. Victory or defeat, that will never change." The words hit her like a physical blow, and for a moment the arena, the crowd, the entire world faded away. There was only Kieran, looking at her with eyes full of love and regret and desperate hope. "Fight me," she whispered. "Really fight me. I need to know I'm strong enough." "You're stronger than you know," he replied. Then his expression shifted, becoming something cold and predatory. "But if you want a real fight, my lady, then that's what you'll get." He moved like lightning. Lyra barely got her blade up in time to block his first strike, the impact sending shockwaves up her arms. His speed was inhuman, his strength overwhelming. This wasn't the careful sparring they'd done in the training facility. This was the Alpha King in all his terrible glory, and he was magnificent. She spun away from his next attack, using her smaller size to her advantage as she tried to find an opening in his defences. But he was everywhere at once, his blade dancing through the air in patterns that seemed impossible to follow. The crowd roared as steel met steel again and again, the sound echoing off the stone walls like thunder. Lyra fought with everything she had, every skill she'd learned in 3 years of pit fighting, every technique Kieran himself had taught her. But it wasn't enough. He was too fast, too strong, too perfect. A particularly vicious combination drove her back toward the edge of the circle, and she realised with growing desperation that she was losing. Not slowly, not gradually, but decisively and inevitably. The man she loved was going to defeat her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Unless... Lyra changed tactics, abandoning defence for pure offence. She threw herself forward in a desperate attack that left her completely exposed, betting everything on a single moment of opportunity. Kieran's eyes widened in surprise as her blade came within inches of his throat. For just an instant he was off balance, caught between blocking her strike and countering it. That instant was all she needed. Lyra twisted at the last second, using his own momentum against him as she swept his legs and sent him crashing to the sand. Before he could recover, she was on top of him, her sword pressed to his throat and her knee on his chest. The crowd went silent. "Yield!" she panted, her blade steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Kieran looked up at her with those impossible golden eyes and slowly, deliberately smiled. "I yield," he said clearly, his voice carrying across the stunned arena. The crowd erupted in confusion. Voices rose in protest, in disbelief, in outrage. The Alpha King had yielded. The gladiator had won. It was impossible, unprecedented, unthinkable. But Lyra barely heard them. She was staring down at Kieran in growing understanding, seeing the truth written in his face, in the way he'd moved just a heartbeat too slowly in that final exchange. "You let me win," she whispered. "Did I?" His smile was soft and full of love. "Or did you simply fight better than I expected?" "You held back, the whole time you were holding back." "Perhaps." Kieran reached up to touch her face with gentle fingers. "Or perhaps I simply found something more important than winning." "What?" "You." His voice broke on the word. "Your happiness, your choice, your freedom to stand beside me as an equal instead of a prize I claimed in battle." Tears blurred Lyra's vision as the full magnitude of his sacrifice hit her. He'd thrown the fight, not obviously, not in a way that would rob her of dignity or pride, but subtly, carefully, giving her the opportunities she needed to defeat him. "You gave me everything," she breathed. "I told you once that you were always free," Kieran said softly. "I meant it. Free to go, free to stay, free to choose your own path. This was just making it official." Around them, the crowd was growing more agitated, confused by what they'd witnessed. Officials were arguing about protocol, about what the king's defeat meant for the kingdom, but Lyra heard none of it. She threw down her sword and pressed her lips to Kieran's in a kiss that tasted of sand and sweat and the salt of her tears. He responded instantly, his arms coming up to hold her against him, as if he'd never let her go. When they finally broke apart, Lyra looked down at the man who'd just sacrificed his pride, his reputation, and possibly his kingdom for her happiness. "I choose you," she said, loud enough for the entire arena to hear. "I choose to stay. I choose to fight beside you, not against you. I choose love." The crowd's roar shook the very foundations of the ancient Colosseum as understanding finally dawned. Their king had found his queen, and she had chosen him in return. Kieran's smile was brighter than the sun as he sat up and pulled her into his arms. "Welcome home, my queen," he murmured against her ear. "Welcome home," she agreed, and for the first time in her life she truly understood what the word meant. The challenge was over. The real adventure was just beginning. As Kieran lifted her to her feet and raised their joined hands toward the cheering crowd, Lyra felt the golden thread that had connected them from the beginning transform into something new. Not a chain or a leash or a bond forced upon them by fate. A choice, a promise, a love freely given and joyfully received. She was free at last, and she had chosen to use that freedom to bind herself to the man who'd been willing to lose everything just to see her smile. It was, she thought as the crowd chanted their names, the most beautiful kind of surrender she could imagine. 6 months later, Queen Lyra stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, watching the sun rise over a kingdom that had become her home in ways she'd never thought possible. The view stretched for miles, rolling green hills dotted with villages where people were beginning their day, smoke rising from countless chimneys, and roads that led to horizons bright with promise. Her hand rested on the gentle swell of her belly, where the heir to the kingdom grew safe and protected. The child would be born into a world very different from the one she'd known, a world where strength wasn't measured only by bloodline, where mercy was as valued as might, and where love could truly conquer all. "You're up early," Kieran's voice came from behind her, warm with sleep and affection. She felt his arms circle her waist, pulling her back against the solid warmth of his chest as he pressed a kiss to the crown of her head. "I couldn't sleep." Lyra leaned into his embrace, marvelling as she did every morning at how perfectly she fit against him. "I was thinking about Elena." "Your sister arrives today," Kieran reminded her gently. "The carriage should reach the palace by midday." It had taken 3 months to locate Elena and convince her that the invitation to court was real, not some elaborate trap. Another month for her to settle her affairs in the northern province and prepare for the journey. And now, finally, Lyra would see her sister again, the only family she had left in the world. What if she doesn't like me anymore? The fear tumbled out before Lyra could stop it. What if I've changed too much? What if she looks at me in this crown and sees a stranger? "Then she'll be blind," Kieran said firmly, turning her in his arms so he could see her face. "You're still the woman who sacrificed everything to protect her, still the sister who loved her enough to endure 3 years of hell to keep her safe. A crown doesn't change that." "Doesn't it?" Lyra touched the simple circlet of silver and sapphires that served as her everyday crown. It was beautiful, elegant, and nothing like the heavy golden monstrosity she'd expected to inherit. Kieran had commissioned it specifically for her, designed to complement her strength rather than overwhelm it. "You tell me," Kieran said, golden eyes twinkling with mischief. Are you the same woman who challenged me to single combat, or have you gone soft in your royal luxury?" "Soft?" Lyra laughed and pulled away from him, adopting the fighting stance he'd taught her in their training sessions. "Is that a challenge, Your Majesty?" "It might be." Kieran circled her with predatory grace, though his smile ruined any attempt at intimidation. "I seem to remember someone promising to teach me her pit-fighting techniques. I'm still waiting." "Patience," Lyra said, echoing the word he'd used so often during their courtship. "Good things come to those who wait." "I've waited 6 months. I think I've been patient enough." Their playful sparring was interrupted by a knock at the chamber door. Marcus's voice called through the heavy wood, carrying news that made Lyra's heart leap. "Your Majesties, the princess's carriage has been sighted. She'll arrive within the hour." Lyra's hand flew to her throat, sudden panic overwhelming her. "An hour? But I'm not ready. I need to change, and my hair—" "Is perfect," Kieran interrupted, catching her hands in his. "You're perfect. Elena is going to take one look at you and see exactly what I see. The strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman in the kingdom." "You're biased." "Completely." His smile was soft and full of love. "But I'm also right." An hour later, Lyra stood in the palace courtyard with her heart hammering against her ribs. The royal carriage rolled through the gates, its wheels crunching on gravel as it drew to a stop before the palace steps. Kieran stood beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth, but far enough that Eleanor would know this reunion belonged to the sisters alone. The carriage door opened, and Eleanor stepped out. Lyra's breath caught. Her sister had grown into a woman during their years apart, taller than Lyra remembered, with the same silver blonde hair but a new confidence in her bearing. She wore a simple but well-made travelling dress, and her blue eyes swept the courtyard with intelligent curiosity before landing on Lyra. For a moment neither sister moved. They simply stood there, drinking in the sight of each other across the distance that represented 3 years of separation, pain, and uncertainty. Then Elena smiled, the same bright, joyful smile that had sustained Lyra through every dark night in the fighting pits, and suddenly they were running toward each other across the courtyard. They collided in a tangle of arms and tears and breathless laughter, holding each other as if they could make up for 3 years of absence through sheer force of will. Lyra buried her face in her sister's shoulder and finally felt the last piece of her broken heart snap back into place. "I missed you," Elena whispered through her tears. "I missed you so much." "I'm sorry," Lyra sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I couldn't come for you sooner, couldn't protect you better." "Stop." Elena pulled back to cup Lyra's face in her hands, her eyes fierce with love. "You saved me. Everything you did, every sacrifice you made, it saved me. I've been safe and happy and free because of your courage. But I left you. You gave me a life." Elena's voice was firm with absolute certainty. "And now look at you. Look what you've become." Her gaze took in the crown, the fine clothes, the way Kieran watched them both with gentle patience. "You're a queen, Lyra, a real queen." "I'm still your sister first." "I know." Elena's smile was radiant. "That's what makes you perfect for this." The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Lyra's life. Elena settled into palace life with surprising ease, her natural warmth and intelligence quickly winning over nobles and servants alike. She had inherited their father's gift with people, and within days she was organising charity events, visiting the kitchens to learn everyone's names, and turning the somewhat stuffy royal court into something that felt more like a home. "She's remarkable," Kieran observed one evening as they watched Elena lead a group of young nobles in an impromptu dance lesson in the Great Hall. "I can see where you got your strength from." "She got the charm," Lyra said with a laugh. "I got the stubbornness." "Lucky me." Kieran pulled her closer, his hand spanning the growing curve of her belly. "Though I suspect our child is going to inherit both." "Poor thing doesn't stand a chance," Lyra agreed, covering his hand with hers. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching Eleanor laugh with their guests and feeling the baby flutter between them in response to the music and joy filling the hall. This was what happiness felt like, Lyra realized. Not the desperate relief of survival, not the wild euphoria of victory, but this quiet, deep contentment that came from being exactly where you belonged. "There's something I want to show you," Kieran said suddenly. He led her through the palace to a part of the building she'd never seen before, older wings that had been closed off for decades. They climbed a narrow spiral staircase to a tower room that overlooked the training grounds, and when Kieran opened the door, Lyra gasped. The room had been transformed into a training facility, but not the elegant practice space where they'd first sparred. This was rawer, more real, sand on the floor, weapons lining the walls, and an atmosphere that spoke of serious work rather than noble recreation. "I don't understand," Lyra said, running her fingers along the pommel of a practice sword. "Your first royal decree as queen," Kieran explained. "Freeing the fighting slaves. It was brilliant and necessary, but it left a lot of young people with nowhere to go, no way to use the skills they'd been forced to develop." Understanding began to dawn. "You want to train them?" "We want to train them, not for entertainment, not for profit, but for protection, for service, for the chance to channel their strength into something that builds instead of destroys." Kieran moved to stand beside her, his golden eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Royal guards, elite soldiers, personal protectors for nobles who've proven they can be trusted. Give them purpose instead of just freedom." "A school," Lyra breathed, seeing the vision take shape in her mind. "A place where survival skills become service skills. Led by someone who understands what they've been through. Someone who can teach them that their past doesn't define their future." Kieran's voice was soft with love and pride. Someone who proved that a gladiator can become a queen. Tears burned behind Lyra's eyes as she looked around the room that would become a sanctuary for people like her. People who'd been broken by circumstance, but refused to stay broken. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow, if you're ready. Marcus has already identified 24 candidates, and Elena has volunteered to help with their academic education." "She has?" "She says someone needs to teach them how to read contracts before they sign them." Kieran's smile was rueful. Apparently, she has strong opinions about people who prey on the desperate. Lyra laughed, imagining her gentle sister laying down the law to a room full of former pit fighters. "She's going to be terrifying. She's going to be magnificent, just like her sister." As autumn gave way to winter, the training program flourished beyond their wildest expectations. Young men and women who'd known only violence and exploitation discovered they had other talents: leadership, strategy, teaching, healing. Some joined the Royal Guard. Others found places in noble households as trusted protectors. A few even chose to return to their home villages as defenders rather than entertainers. But it wasn't until the night their daughter was born that Lyra truly understood what they'd accomplished. "She's perfect," Elena whispered, cradling the tiny princess in her arms. The baby had Kieran's dark hair and Lyra's silver eyes, and she'd entered the world with a furious cry that suggested she would be a force to be reckoned with. "She's fierce," Kieran agreed, his voice thick with emotion as he looked down at his daughter. "Like her mother." "She'll never know captivity," Lyra said, touching her daughter's tiny fist. "Only choice." "And she'll grow up knowing that strength comes in many forms," Elena added, "that queens can be born in palaces or forged in fighting pits, and both are equally worthy." As dawn broke over the kingdom, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Lyra held her daughter close and felt the future stretching out before them like an open road. There would be challenges ahead. There always were. Political intrigue, neighbouring kingdoms testing their resolve, the constant work of ruling justly in an imperfect world, but they would face it together. A king who'd learned that true strength lay in lifting others up. a queen who discovered that freedom meant nothing without the courage to use it well, and a daughter who would grow up knowing she could be anything she chose to be. The golden thread that had once bound Lyra to her fate had transformed into something far more precious, a web of love and loyalty that connected her to everyone she held dear: sister, husband, daughter, students, subjects, friends. She was free at last, and she had chosen to use that freedom to build something beautiful. It was, she thought, as she watched the sunrise paint the world in hope, the most perfect kind of victory she could imagine. Where are you listening from? I love hearing your thoughts about these stories of found love and chosen family. If you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free and it helps more people hear these tales of love conquering all.